Chapter 1. Silent Dinner. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked monotonously, filling the gaps between the clinking of silverware and the occasional scrape of a chair against the linoleum floor. The Whitman-Adler family's dining room was modest, a wooden table, four mismatched chairs, and a flickering ceiling light that buzzed faintly like a mosquito trapped in glass. Noah sat across from Frank, his shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lowered toward his plate. A half-eaten piece of grilled chicken rested beside a pile of untouched green beans. Emily, always the gentle mediator, sat between them, smiling tightly as she passed the salt across the table like it was some kind of peace offering. "How was school today, honey?" Emily asked, turning to Noah. He gave a small shrug. "Fine." She looked hopeful, but didn't press. They had this same exchange almost every night. She would ask. He would reply with one syllable. And Frank. Frank would stay silent, cutting his meat with the same robotic precision, chewing slowly like each bite required all of his attention. Noah hated these dinners not because they were unpleasant, but because they were void. A void that had opened years ago when Frank moved in and never seemed to close. He wasn't a bad man. He never yelled, never hit, never even raised his voice. But that, in some ways, made things worse. He was simply there, present but absent. Tonight was no different. Frank reached for his glass of water, his arm brushing slightly against the folded newspaper beside his plate. Noah noticed the grease stains on Frank's fingers, the result of another day at the auto garage. Emily had told him once that Frank's hands had always been like that, rough, strong, permanently smelling of metal and oil. They weren't the kind of hands that painted birthday signs or patted backs after a school performance. They were hands that fixed broken engines and quietly left envelopes of cash on the kitchen counter when Emily's paycheck came up short. "Your art teacher emailed," Emily ventured, breaking the silence again. "She said your latest piece was really impressive." Noah tensed. He could feel Frank's gaze lift momentarily, a glance. A flicker of attention, but he didn't look up to confirm. Instead, he mumbled, "She says that to everyone." Emily gave a light laugh, trying to soften the air. "Still, you're talented. Maybe you could show your sketchbook to Frank sometime. I'm sure he'd love to see it." This time, Noah did look up, at her, not him. "It's fine, Mom. It's just drawings." Frank cleared his throat. The sound startled them both, as rare as a shooting star. He didn't say anything, just shifted in his chair and took another bite of chicken. That small movement, that half-swallowed sound, was the most he had contributed to their conversation in days. Noah stood up. "I'm done," he said, even though half his food remained. He picked up his plate and walked to the sink. Behind him, Emily's voice trailed after gently, "Noah, sweetie." "I'm not hungry," he added, cutting her off, and rinsed the dish under the water. The faucet hissed louder than necessary. As he turned to leave the kitchen, his eyes briefly met Frank's. It wasn't confrontation, more like a silent acknowledgement of distance. Like two strangers nodding on the same sidewalk before moving in opposite directions. He walked up the stairs two at a time and shut the door to his room. His walls were covered in sketches, taped unevenly and curling at the edges, portraits, animals, dreamlike landscapes where clouds had faces and trees whispered secrets. A place where emotions were loud and visible, unlike downstairs. Noah collapsed on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning above. He could still hear the faint hum of dishes being cleared. The occasional clink as Emily probably tried to coax Frank into saying something more than a grunt. He didn't hate Frank. Not really. But he didn't know how to love someone who didn't seem to want to be loved. Noah remembered a time when he was 6, right after his mom remarried. He had fallen and scraped his knee on the driveway. Frank had come outside, silently scooped him up, and carried him inside without a word. No comfort, no "it's okay," no hug. Just disinfectant, a bandage, and then walking away. Since then, Noah had learned not to expect anything from Frank. He stopped showing him his drawings. Stopped asking him questions. Stopped waiting for that impossible thing to be called son. And yet, sometimes, just sometimes, he caught Frank watching him at the breakfast table through the garage window during parent-teacher nights. Like he wanted to say something. But the words got stuck behind gears and silence. Lying there in the quiet, Noah pulled his sketchbook from the nightstand and opened it to a blank page. He hesitated, then began to draw. Not a car. Not a landscape. Not even a face. But a hand, rough, strong, and covered in engine grease, reaching out, just slightly, as if unsure whether to close the distance. And for the first time in a long time, Noah didn't feel angry. Just curious. Maybe tomorrow he'd leave the sketchbook on the kitchen table, by accident. Or maybe not. But the thought stayed with him, like the slow spin of the ceiling fan above, quiet, persistent, and not quite ready to stop. Chapter 2. A Solo Exhibition. Saturday mornings in Spokane were slow. The kind that lingered like dew on the grass outside and smelled faintly of old coffee and firewood. Noah woke later than usual. The soft light from the half-drawn curtains made his room glow in hues of dusty gold, and for a few seconds, everything felt still. He stretched, blinking sleep from his eyes, then sat up with a groan. On the floor near his bed lay the sketchbook from last night, its cover slightly bent. He picked it up, flipping through pages filled with visions and fragments of himself. Faceless people, landscapes that bled into skies, and on the last page, the rough hand he had drawn from memory, Frank's hand. He didn't know what had compelled him to draw it. Maybe it was guilt, or longing, or something unnamed sitting quietly in his chest. As he went downstairs, he heard the faint murmur of the television from the living room. His mom's voice floated in from the kitchen, humming an old jazz tune while frying eggs. Frank, as expected, was nowhere in sight. Noah placed the sketchbook on the counter beside the cereal boxes. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't want to seem like he was asking for attention. But somewhere inside, a small knot of hope twisted. "Morning, baby," Emily greeted, her auburn hair tied in a messy bun, spatula in hand. "Hungry?" "Yeah," Noah replied, sliding into a chair. "A little." As she placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, she noticed the sketchbook. Her hand paused over the counter. "You leaving that out for me to look at?" she asked teasingly. Noah gave a crooked smile. "You can, if you want." She opened it casually, flipping through pages with motherly pride. "These are incredible, Noah." "Really?" He didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the hallway, on the hope that maybe Frank would walk in, see the sketchbook, but the door stayed closed. The hope wilted a little. At noon, Noah biked downtown to the Community Art Center. Ms. Kelly, his high school art teacher, had invited him to participate in a student exhibition, nothing major. Just a corner space for his works. A few local families would walk through, some parents, maybe the occasional talent scout if they were lucky. Noah carried a canvas under his arm. Carefully wrapped in brown paper, a stormy seascape painted in moody blues and grays. It was the first piece he'd ever signed with his full name, Noah Whitman. It felt like a declaration somehow. Inside the gallery, he was greeted with the sharp scent of turpentine and acrylics. Teen artists were pinning their works, laughing, bustling with excitement. Unless Kelly approached him with her usual burst of energy. "There he is, our resident surrealist," she said with a grin. "You brought the piece?" He nodded, unwrapping it slowly. "Unless." Kelly's expression softened. "It's beautiful, Noah." Deep. Evocative. Noah glanced at the painting. "It's about feeling trapped. Like you want to reach land, but the waves keep pulling you back." She nodded knowingly. "You ever show this one to your family?" He hesitated. "Mom's seen some sketches. But Frank doesn't really say anything." Ms. Kelly didn't press, just patted his shoulder. "Well, maybe one day." Some people just show love differently. Noah didn't respond. He finished setting up his corner, placing his other pieces on small easels, stepping back to observe. It wasn't much, but it was his. His colors, his thoughts, his silence on display. As the doors opened and people began to stream in, he stood nearby, arms crossed. Some parents pointed at his abstract trees. One little girl smiled at his painting of a fox sleeping under falling stars. But most simply passed by. He wasn't surprised. His work didn't shout. It whispered. About an hour in, while he was chatting with another student, he glanced toward the doorway and froze. Frank was standing there, in his usual worn jeans and dark flannel shirt. A little dust still on his boots. He looked painfully out of place in a room of canvas and color. His eyes scanned the crowd, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, they settled on Noah. Their eyes met. Frank nodded once. Noah's mouth went dry. I'll be right back, he said to the other student and hurried toward him. You came, Noah said quietly, unsure what emotion was supposed to surface. Surprise? Gratitude? Embarrassment? Frank gave a grunt. Your mom told me about the exhibit. Oh! Noah's voice was flat, too tangled to say more. They stood side by side now, walking slowly toward the display of Noah's works. Frank didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked, really looked. At the trees that bled red. At the stormy sea. At the sketch of two figures standing on opposite cliffs, a bridge half-built between them. Finally, Frank said, This one's strong. He was pointing at the seascape. Noah blinked. You like it? Frank shrugged, his voice low. It feels honest. The knot in Noah's chest tugged hard. It's about wanting to reach someone, even if you're not sure they want you to. Frank was silent. Then, after a pause, he murmured, I'd get that. Noah swallowed. Do you? Frank didn't answer, but his hand reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled envelope, the same one Noah had seen weeks ago on the kitchen counter, stained with garage grease. Inside was a folded brochure, Washington Art Conservatory. Scholarship program. I saw this on the table. Thought maybe you dropped it. I've been saving up, just in case. Noah took the paper in trembling fingers. I thought you didn't care. I didn't know how to show it, Frank replied. The silence between them now felt different. Not empty. Just waiting. Noah looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. Thanks for coming. Frank gave a tiny nod. Wouldn't miss it. Chapter 3. The Man with No Words. That evening, back at home, Noah sat on the edge of his bed, the envelope still in his hands. He had opened it again and again, tracing the edges of the folded brochure like it held some kind of secret. It wasn't just the scholarship flyer. Tucked inside, as if placed there on a whim, was a small yellow receipt, a wire transfer of $3,000. Frank's name was on it. The memo line simply said, for N.W. tuition. It was dated 2 months ago. Noah leaned back on his pillow, overwhelmed by a strange mix of emotions that didn't have names. Embarrassment, relief, guilt, gratitude, confusion. They all swirled inside him like paint colors mixed too hard until everything turned gray. Downstairs, he could hear the muffled clink of tools. Frank, as always, had retreated to the garage, his own quiet world, away from the soft things that required too many words. Noah stood up, hesitated, then grabbed a blank sheet of paper from his sketchpad. He folded it carefully, slipped it into a clean envelope, and walked downstairs barefoot. The cold steps against his feet made him feel grounded. The garage door was half open, as usual. Inside, the smell of oil, steel, and old wood filled the air. Frank was under the hood of an old pickup, humming a song so faint it sounded more like breathing. Noah didn't say anything. He just walked up and placed the envelope on the workbench. Frank looked up, brow slightly furrowed. What's that? He asked. A drawing, Noah replied. For you. Frank wiped his hands on a rag. Why? Noah gave a half smile. Because I thought you might understand this one, even if it doesn't come with words. Frank opened the envelope with rough fingers and pulled out the sketch. It was simple. Two hands, one young, one weathered, reaching toward each other, fingertips almost touching. The background was unfinished. The space between them, deliberately blank. Frank stared at it for a long time. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes softened. This is, he trailed off. His voice caught like a bolt that wouldn't turn. Noah waited. For once. He didn't need an answer. The silence felt okay now, not empty, but full of something trying to be said. Frank folded the paper and placed it in his toolbox. He didn't say, thank you. He didn't say anything at all. But when he turned back to Noah, his hand came up, hesitant, and ruffled the boy's hair. Noah stood frozen, more shocked by the small gesture than any shout or hug could have made him. It was the first time Frank had ever touched him like that. Not out of necessity. Not for first aid. Not to fix a seatbelt or push him gently away. But to connect. And that said more than words ever could. Later that night, Emily peeked into Noah's room with a steaming mug of cocoa. I saw the envelope, she said softly. Did he say anything? Noah smiled into his pillow. Not really. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. That's kind of how he is, honey. He's not made of stories and speeches. He's more quiet tools and steady hands. I know, Noah murmured. She reached out, touching his shoulder. When I first met him, I wasn't sure he could love anyone again. He lost someone, long before us. A little boy. Noah turned toward her. I didn't know that. He doesn't talk about it. It was years before me. A car accident. He never forgave himself. He built walls after that, strong ones. Not because he wanted to keep others out, but because he thought he didn't deserve to love again. Noah blinked slowly, the words settling into place. Emily continued, but you've always mattered to him. He just never figured out how to show it. Noah sat up a little. Mom, do you think he sees me like a son? Emily smiled. I think he's been trying to since the day he met you. And today? You let him. The next morning was Sunday. Noah woke to the smell of pancakes and something else, the soft rumble of Frank's voice humming again. This time, it was clearer. A tune Noah didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. When he came downstairs, Frank was at the stove, flipping pancakes. Emily leaned against the fridge, amused. Morning, Frank said. Not looking up. Noah blinked. You're cooking. Frank shrugged. Figured you could use a decent breakfast before applying for that scholarship. Noah sat down at the table, still stunned. A plate slid in front of him, pancakes slightly lopsided but warm and golden. Thanks, he said. Frank poured coffee, then finally sat down across from him. For a while, they ate in silence, not the cold, stiff silence of the past, but one filled with something else. Halfway through the meal, Frank cleared his throat. I liked the drawing, he said. The hands. Noah looked up, surprised. Yeah, you got the roughness right. Noah chuckled. I had a good reference. Frank smiled, a tiny, lopsided thing that barely curved his lips, but it was real. And in that smile, Noah saw all the words Frank would never say, all the apologies, the wishes, the love tucked away in rusted metal and quiet glances. He didn't need to hear them anymore. Chapter 4. The Lost Scholarship Letter. The next week moved differently, not faster, not slower, but deeper. The kind of days where silence no longer stung, but settled gently in corners like sunlight through old windows. Noah didn't talk more than usual, and neither did Frank. But something had shifted. Every morning, when Noah came down for breakfast, Frank would nod. Not much, not dramatic. Just a silent gesture that said, I see you. Noah had started drawing more. Not for assignments or contests, but for himself. Each night, he filled page after page with hands, eyes, machines, bridges, unspoken gestures. His art had stopped screaming and started listening. On Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived, slim and formal, from the Washington Art Conservatory. The envelope was wrinkled at the corners, like it had been held too long by the mailman. Or maybe fate. Noah stood in the driveway holding it, the ink already smudging with sweat from his fingers. He turned it over once, twice, then slowly broke the seal. Inside, a single page. Dear Mr. Whitman, we are writing to inform you that, after careful review of your application and portfolio, you have been selected as one of this year's finalists for the 2024 Visual Arts Scholarship. Noah's breath caught. Finalist. He reread it 3 times before sprinting into the house. Mom, he called. I got the letter. Emily emerged from the kitchen, hands still wet with soap. Frank followed a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag like always. Noah waved the paper. I'm a finalist. They picked me. Emily squealed and wrapped him in a tight hug, almost knocking the letter from his hands. Oh, baby, I'm so proud of you. Frank didn't move immediately. He stood near the counter. Quiet, watching. Then he walked over, reached out, and clapped a strong hand on Noah's shoulder. Well deserved, he said. And it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Firm. Honest. Like a builder stepping back to admire something finally finished. Noah looked up. I wouldn't have submitted it without that brochure. Or the tuition help. Frank shifted awkwardly. You would have figured it out. Just needed a push. There was a long pause. Then, in a voice not much louder than a whisper, Noah said, Thanks, Dad. Frank blinked. His hands, once so steady, clenched slightly, then relaxed. A slow exhale passed through him, almost a shudder. He didn't say, You're welcome. He didn't say anything, but in that moment, they both knew. Something buried had finally been uncovered. A word unspoken for 17 years had finally found its way home. Later that evening, Noah sat at the dining table, filling out final forms for the scholarship program. Emily was cooking again, the scent of rosemary chicken drifting through the house. Frank had gone out to the garage. But he wasn't fixing anything. He just sat there sometimes, like it helped him think. Noah shuffled through his folder for one last document, a scanned copy of his acceptance confirmation, and realized it wasn't there. Panic prickled his spine. He tore through the folder. Then the desk drawer. Then his backpack. Nothing. Mom, did you see a manila folder with a blue sticker? He called out. Emily poked her head in. Check the garage. Maybe it slipped out when you were showing Dad that first envelope. Noah bolted outside, flung open the garage door, and searched. Papers. Wrenches. Oil-stained rags. No folder. Then a soft gust of wind stirred the air, and something fluttered by the garage door. A corner of yellow paper caught beneath a toolbox. Noah reached down, heart hammering, and yanked it free. It was the folder, torn slightly at the edge, but otherwise intact. He exhaled, relief flooding through him like cool water. As he turned to leave, he saw Frank sitting in the far corner, drinking from a chipped mug. He wasn't watching. He was staring at a small, framed photo on the shelf behind his workbench. Curious, Noah stepped closer. It was a picture of a boy younger than him, with sandy blonde hair and a grin full of missing teeth. He was sitting on the hood of a classic Ford, Frank's arms wrapped around him, both laughing. Noah froze. Frank noticed, but didn't flinch. That was Nathan, he said softly. Noah turned. Your son. Frank nodded. He'd be about your age now. Maybe a little older. Noah didn't speak. He waited. He died in a car crash, Frank continued. Driver ran a red light. I was supposed to pick him up that day, but I got stuck at work. His voice trembled, a crack in the concrete. I thought if I stayed away from things I loved, I wouldn't lose them again. Noah's throat tightened. Is that why you stayed distant from me? Frank looked at him. His eyes were glassy but steady. I didn't mean to. I just didn't know how to start. Noah stepped forward. You just did. For a long moment, they stood in silence, not as father and son. Not yet, but as two souls meeting somewhere in the middle, each carrying their own pain, finally sharing the load. Frank broke the quiet. You've always deserved better than silence. I'm sorry. Noah took a deep breath. Then maybe we can try something else. Starting now. Frank nodded once, a motion so subtle it almost didn't happen. Then, with a deep voice full of gravel and tenderness, he said, I'd like that. Chapter 5. Blood and Steel. The sky over Spokane had darkened too early for spring. Clouds gathered like bruises overhead, heavy with a storm that hadn't yet decided if it wanted to pour or pass. Noah zipped up his jacket and slung his sketch bag over his shoulder. His meeting with MS Kelly about portfolio refinements had run long, and now he was running late for dinner, again. He cut through the neighborhood shortcut, the one with the crumbling sidewalk near Pacific Avenue, where cars often rolled too fast and pedestrians stuck close to the edge. Frank had warned him once, months ago. Use the main road. Cars don't see you here. Back then, Noah had shrugged it off. Frank warned about everything: rainy weather, chipped stairs, the danger of microwaving foil. But tonight, as he walked briskly under the darkening sky, something gnawed at him. He picked up his pace. At the same moment, a beat-up black SUV came roaring around the corner, headlights off, music thumping from inside like a second heart. Noah turned just in time to see it. Too close, too fast. The world froze. In that split second, he tried to jump back. But the sketch bag strap caught on a metal railing. His feet tangled. He went down hard, knees scraping pavement, as the SUV swerved violently. And then, a body. A wall of denim and flannel shoved him back with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. Frank. He didn't see where he came from, only heard the sickening sound of brakes screaming and metal striking flesh. Then a loud thud. Then silence. The SUV skidded to a stop halfway down the street. Its door opened slightly, then slammed shut again. The car peeled away, disappearing into the dark like a coward. Noah blinked. Dust in his eyes. Rain starting to fall. Frank lay still on the concrete. No, Noah scrambled over, hands shaking. Dad. His voice cracked. The words slipped out without thought. He didn't even realize he'd said it. Dad. Frank groaned. His leg twisted at a wrong angle, blood oozing from a gash above his eyebrow. Noah pulled off his jacket, pressed it to Frank's head. Stay with me. Please. You're okay. You're okay. Frank coughed. You? All right. Me? I'm fine, but you, Jesus. Dad, why did you? Frank's hand, slick with blood, reached up and grabbed Noah's wrist. Couldn't let you get hit. Tears blurred Noah's vision. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called. Red and blue lights began dancing on the pavement. The sound of approaching help grew louder. Noah clutched his father's hand. I'm here. I'm not leaving. I swear. Frank tried to nod. Good boy. And then his eyes fluttered closed. The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, antiseptic air, and endless questions. At the hospital, Emily arrived breathless and pale. She wrapped her arms around Noah, and they waited, minute after aching minute, as doctors moved behind swinging doors, saying words like concussion, compound fracture, internal bleeding, and surgery. Noah sat in a stiff plastic chair, blood still dried on his hands. He stared at them like they didn't belong to him. Dad saved me, he whispered. Emily turned toward him, eyes glistening. Yes, he did. I thought. Noah's voice cracked. I thought he never cared. Emily reached over, held his hands gently. He's always cared, Noah. Always. He just didn't know how to show it. Noah swallowed the sob rising in his throat. I didn't get to tell him everything. Not yet. Emily smiled through her tears. You already did. Hours later, a nurse called them in. Frank was alive. Battered, broken, but stable. Noah stepped into the hospital room slowly. Machines beeped quietly, tubes and bandages covering his father like armor from some invisible battle. Frank turned his head slightly as Noah approached. One eye bruised, one arm in a sling, but a faint smile playing at the edge of his lips. You still in one piece? He rasped. Noah laughed. A sound caught between relief and heartbreak. Yeah, thanks to you. Frank's gaze didn't waver. Good. There was a long pause. Then Noah pulled a chair close and sat beside him. I called you Dad earlier, he said softly. Frank blinked. Yeah. Frank closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were glassy with tears. Best sound I ever heard. He whispered. Noah leaned forward, gripping his hand. And I meant it. They sat in silence after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because, finally, they didn't need words to say it. Chapter 6. First sketch after the fall. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and old metal. The sun filtered through half-closed blinds, striping the floor with pale morning light. Machines beeped softly in rhythm with Frank's steady breathing, and Noah sat curled in a plastic chair beside the bed, knees tucked under his chin, sketchpad balanced on his lap. It had been 3 days since the accident. Frank was still weak, but stable. The doctors said he was lucky the fractures would heal. The internal bleeding had been contained in time. Lucky felt like an absurd word to Noah. Nothing about the image of Frank lying broken on the pavement had felt lucky. But then again, maybe alive was lucky enough. Noah glanced over at the bed. Frank slept with his mouth slightly open, one arm bandaged, the other tucked beneath the blanket. His face, usually so unreadable, looked strangely soft in rest, the lines around his mouth relaxed, the tension in his jaw gone. He looked older, more human. Noah looked down at his sketchpad. The pencil trembled slightly in his hand. It had been days since he'd drawn anything. The fear, the adrenaline, the guilt, they had drained him dry. But now, sitting here in the quiet, something stirred again. He began to draw. Slow, deliberate lines. The shape of a hand, not outstretched this time, but holding something invisible. Then the curve of a shoulder. A sling. The lines of a hospital bed, cold and stiff, turned softer under his pencil's touch. He didn't aim for realism. He aimed for truth. Frank, not as a mechanic. Not as the man who sat in silence. But as the man who ran without thinking. The man who dove into danger not with words, but with instinct. The man who held his son's life above his own. The sketch grew with every breath Frank took. Halfway through, Frank stirred. Noah froze. Frank blinked slowly, turning his head to look at him. You're up early, he croaked. Noah smiled. Didn't sleep much. Frank's eyes drifted down to the sketchpad. What's that? He asked. Noah hesitated. Then he turned the pad around. Frank studied the drawing for a long moment. His face gave nothing away. Just his eyes, soft, distant, searching. That me? He asked. Yeah, Noah replied, voice quiet. Frank chuckled, wincing as he shifted. You made me look brave. Noah raised an eyebrow. You were. Frank didn't answer right away. His hand moved slightly, reaching for the water on the side table. Noah helped him lift the cup to his lips. After a sip, Frank spoke again. Never thought I'd be in one of your drawings. Noah stared at him. You've always been there. I just didn't know it. That made Frank pause. He looked at Noah, really looked, the way he might study a broken engine he finally understood. You scared me, you know, Frank said. That car was coming so fast. I didn't even think. Just ran. Noah's throat tightened. You could have died. Frank's voice dropped. I was more afraid of losing you than anything else. Silence settled between them again, not heavy, but full. Full of meaning, of healing, of things long unsaid that no longer needed to be spelled out. Noah looked at the sketch again. I think I'm gonna add it to the portfolio. Title it The Quiet Hero. Frank chuckled. That might be a stretch. No, Noah said firmly. That's exactly what it is. Later that day, Emily arrived with a thermos of homemade soup and a stack of magazines no one would actually read. She fussed over Frank's pillows, adjusted the blinds, and kissed Noah's temple before settling down beside them. You're both looking more alive today, she said with a soft smile. Noah handed her the sketch pad. Look what I finished this morning. Emily flipped to the page, eyes widening. Her hand flew to her chest. Oh my God. Noah, this is, her voice caught. Frank looked away, embarrassed. It's a little dramatic, don't you think? Emily shook her head. It's perfect. It's you, Frank. Frank scoffed, trying to hide his discomfort behind his sip of lukewarm soup. Noah leaned back in the chair, his head resting lightly against the wall. He felt calm. The storm had passed. Not just the one on the street, but the one inside him. The years of bitterness, misunderstanding, and quiet distance, it had all cracked open like ice under pressure. And something new was growing in the space left behind. Something warmer, stronger, like steel forged in fire. That night, after Emily left and the nurse dimmed the lights, Noah and Frank sat quietly again. Do you remember, Noah asked suddenly, the time I fell off my bike when I was 9? Frank nodded. You scraped your elbow pretty bad. Wouldn't stop crying. You didn't say a word. Just walked me home, patched me up, and handed me a soda. Frank chuckled. Didn't know what else to do. Noah smiled. Back then I thought you were cold. But now I think you were just afraid to do it wrong. Frank looked over. I probably did. Noah shook his head. You did enough. Another pause. Then Frank reached out, his bandaged hand slow and stiff, and placed it gently over Noah's. I'm proud of you, he said. Noah looked down at their hands. I'm proud of you too, he whispered. Chapter 7. Homecoming. The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital lobby windows in a golden haze as Frank Adler was wheeled toward the exit, his casted leg sticking awkwardly forward and a paper bag of medication nestled in his lap. Noah walked beside the wheelchair, one hand on the handle, the other gripping Frank's overnight duffel bag. Emily trailed a few steps behind, smiling, her purse swinging lightly at her side, as if her heart had finally exhaled after days of holding its breath. They reached the family's rusted blue pickup truck. Emily opened the passenger door while Noah helped Frank maneuver slowly into the seat. It was a quiet operation. Frank grimaced as he adjusted his leg. Noah didn't say anything, just waited patiently until his father nodded in place. Ready? Noah asked. Frank gave a grunt that was probably meant to mean yes. And Noah couldn't help but smile. Some things didn't change, and maybe they didn't need to. The house felt different when they returned. Not because anything had moved, but because the weight that had always seemed to press down on the walls, that invisible tension that had hung over dinners, conversations, birthdays, had finally lifted. Noah unlocked the front door and pushed it open. Sunlight spilled into the entryway. Everything smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and home. Frank hobbled in slowly on crutches. Emily had arranged for a medical bench in the living room, close to the couch. Noah helped lower him down, placing a pillow behind his back and a blanket over his lap. Frank let out a long sigh. Damn, that couch feels like heaven. You smell like hospital, Emily teased, sitting beside him and brushing a lock of silver hair from his forehead. Frank rolled his eyes. Better than motor oil. I suppose. Noah watched them, the tenderness, the rhythm of their exchange. It wasn't theatrical or loud, but it was real. He hadn't always seen it, but it had been there all along. Like sunlight through blinds muted, but always waiting. That evening, Noah cooked dinner. He wasn't great at it: overcooked pasta, bland tomato sauce, and a nearly burnt garlic bread. But when he placed the mismatched plates on the table and sat down across from Frank, it felt like the most sacred meal of the year. Frank took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and gave a short nod. "Edible," he said. Noah grinned. High praise. They ate quietly. Emily lit a candle in the middle of the table, just for ambience, and for once, the silence wasn't because they had nothing to say. It was because everything had already been said, in all the ways that mattered. Halfway through the meal, Frank looked up. "I've been thinking," he began. "You're going off to that conservatory soon. Seattle, right?" Noah nodded. "If the scholarship comes through." Frank took a breath. "I'd like to help. Tuition, supplies, rent. Whatever you need. I've got savings." Noah's fork paused midair. "You've already helped so much." Frank shook his head. "I want to do more. Not out of guilt. Just because I can. Because I want to." Noah lowered his fork slowly. His voice was softer now. "Then, I'd like that. I really would." They didn't raise glasses. They didn't toast. But something clinked in that moment, something invisible and permanent. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Frank remained on the couch with his leg propped up. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner and the flickering television playing an old baseball game on mute. Noah sat on the floor, back against the couch, sketchpad resting against his knees. He flipped to a new page and drew slowly, lines flowing without force. Frank glanced down. "What are you working on?" he asked. Noah hesitated. "A memory." Frank leaned closer. Noah angled the pad so he could see. It was a drawing of a young boy sitting on a workbench in a garage, legs swinging, grease smudged on his cheek. Beside him, an older man worked quietly on a car engine, one hand reaching out to hand the boy a wrench. The boy looked at the man with quiet admiration. Frank's brows drew together. "Is that us?" "Yeah," Noah said. "It's from when I was about 10. You taught me how to change oil." Frank chuckled. "You spilled half a bottle on the driveway." "I did," Noah said with a smile. "But you didn't get mad." Frank looked at the sketch for a long time. "I didn't know you remembered that." "I remember everything," Noah replied. "I just didn't know how much it meant until now." Frank's eyes misted over. He leaned back, covering his face with his hand. Noah turned to him gently. "You okay?" Frank cleared his throat. "Yeah, He paused. "I used to think I failed Nathan. And then when I became your stepdad, I promised myself I wouldn't get too close. Thought maybe if I stayed distant, I couldn't mess it up." Noah sat still. Frank looked at him. "But you let me in anyway, even when I didn't deserve it." Noah shook his head. "You always did." A silence followed, full of forgiveness. Then, for the first time, Frank said the words, "I love you, son." And for the first time, Noah didn't need to hear them, but hearing them still cracked something open in him. The kind of break that lets the light in. "I love you too, Dad," he whispered. And it wasn't awkward. It wasn't late. It was right on time. Chapter 8. The Last Garage Visit. The summer sun cast golden lines across the cracked pavement of the driveway, and the old garage stood quiet, its paint a little more faded, its wooden beams creaking like they remembered more than they let on. Noah stood outside the garage door, a duffel bag slung across his back, one hand holding a rolled canvas, the other resting on the handle. He hadn't been in here since the accident. Frank's tools were still in place, arranged with the kind of obsessive care that could only come from a man who found comfort in order. The smell of motor oil, old leather, and pine soap greeted him like an old friend. Everything looked exactly the same, and yet it didn't. This time, it wasn't just a garage. It was a monument to the silent years, a shrine of unspoken lessons, a museum of the fatherhood neither of them had known how to ask for. He stepped inside. The workbench was still dusty. A spare spark plug sat on a ragged cloth. The framed picture of Frank and his late son Nathan, the boy on the hood of the Ford, remained exactly where it had always been. But now, next to it, leaned something new. The sketch Noah had drawn in the hospital, the quiet hero, framed in simple black wood. Noah hadn't put it there. Frank had. A quiet warmth spread through his chest. He placed the duffel bag down and walked over to the tool rack. His fingers brushed over the hammer, the socket wrench, the oil funnel, relics of Frank's world. A world of steel and sweat. A world Noah had once avoided because it felt so different from his own. Now he realized it had always been part of him. Behind him, the creaking of crutches. Noah turned. Frank stood in the doorway, leaning slightly against the doorframe, his legs still in a brace, but stronger now. His face held the quiet pride of a man seeing his work not in an engine, but in a person finally running smooth. "Didn't think you'd come back in here before leaving," Frank said, voice low. "I had to," Noah replied. "Felt wrong not to." Frank nodded. Stepping inside slowly. "You were what, 7? First time I brought you in here. You spilled brake fluid on my boots." Noah chuckled. "You didn't even yell." "I wanted to," Frank admitted. "But you looked so scared. I figured it'd be better to show you how to clean it up than scare you off for good." "You did both," Noah joked. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Noah said, "I used to think this place was a fortress. Like it kept you locked in, away from us." Frank looked around, his eyes scanning every crack and shadow. "It was. At first." "What changed?" Frank turned toward him. You kept coming back." Noah's throat tightened. Frank continued, "I'd come in here after a long day, just to be alone. And there you'd be, sitting on that stool. Sketching. Not talking. Just being there." "I guess I was waiting," Noah said. "For what?" "For you to let me in." Frank's voice cracked. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Noah shook his head. "You didn't lock the door, Dad. I just didn't know how to knock." Frank chuckled, then winced, a sharp breath catching in his chest. Noah instinctively reached out, steadying him. Their hands met. And for once, neither pulled away. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Noah said, voice soft. "Seattle's not far, but it's a new chapter." Frank nodded. "You ready?" Noah smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." Frank reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "I meant to give this to you earlier." Noah took it, surprised. He peeled away the paper and opened the lid. Inside was an old, slightly worn wrench, engraved with the initials N.W. Noah blinked. "This was mine," Frank said. "Then Nathan's. Now yours." "It's not about fixing engines. It's about remembering where you came from." Noah held the wrench tightly. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. Frank gestured to the canvas Noah had brought. "Taking that one with you?" Noah nodded. "It's going up in my dorm. First thing I hang." "Good." They stood side by side at the garage entrance, watching the sky bleed orange and lavender as the sun dipped behind the pines. The quiet stretched long and warm between them. Finally, Noah turned to him. "You know, I used to think I was missing something. That because you weren't loud or affectionate or obvious. It meant you didn't care." Frank turned to meet his eyes. "But I get it now," Noah said. "You were always there. You just spoke in steel and silence." Frank swallowed hard. "And you listened anyway." Noah smiled. "Yeah, I did." As the last light faded, Noah picked up his duffel bag and canvas, then reached for the wrench and tucked it carefully into the front pocket. "I'll call you when I get there," he said. Frank gave a short nod. "I'll be here." And as Noah stepped into the twilight, the wrench heavy in his hand and the sketch rolled under his arm, he realized something. Some fathers build engines. Others build bridges. Frank Adler had done both. And Noah Whitman, his son, in every way that mattered, would carry that strength into the world. Chapter 9. New Canvas, New City. Seattle greeted Noah with mist and soft light. The city smelled of rain-soaked concrete and espresso, and the streets shimmered with reflections of street lamps and hurried footsteps. It was a place full of movement, 1,000 lives pulsing around him, but strangely, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a clean slate. His dorm room was small and spare, with a single bed, a desk by the window, and a pin board left empty by the last tenant. As Noah unpacked, he found the canvas he'd brought from home, the quiet hero, still tightly rolled in its protective tube. He hung it above his bed. The figure in the drawing, Frank, stood in profile. Quiet and strong, a silhouette against a backdrop of abstract steel shapes and blurred faces. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was honest. And it made the room feel less unfamiliar. That night, Noah sat on his narrow mattress, legs crossed, sketchpad on his lap. The city hummed outside his window, cars, conversation, distant music, a lullaby of new beginnings. He drew late into the night. Not just hands or portraits, but stories. A boy watching a man fix a car. A teenager holding back words he didn't know how to say. A man throwing himself into the path of a car to save the son who still wasn't sure he could call him dad. All of it spilled out in charcoal and ink. And when he slept, it was with a sense of peace he hadn't known he'd been waiting for. The Washington Art Conservatory was everything he'd hoped and feared. The talent around him was staggering. Students with portfolios like art history textbooks. Instructors who spoke like poets. Galleries filled with light and silence and the ghosts of great ambition. Noah sometimes felt like a mechanic's kid in a ballroom out of place. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Frank's hand on his shoulder, the scar on his brow, the wrench engraved with his initials. He remembered the garage, the couch, the quiet strength in his father's silence. And he kept going. 3 weeks into the semester, Noah's instructor, Professor Lin, approached him after class. "You work differently," she said, flipping through his latest sketches. "Not just technically. Emotionally." Noah blinked. "Is that good?" She smiled. "It's rare." She tapped a page, one of Frank at the hospital, bandaged but upright, looking quietly toward the window. "This piece," she said, "isn't just about injury or recovery. It's about grace." Quiet heroism. Noah didn't speak. She looked up. "Would you consider submitting a small series for the fall showcase? 3 or 4 works around a theme. I think this story of yours, it's worth sharing." He hesitated. "It's personal. All good art is," she replied. That night, Noah called home. Frank answered, voice still low and gravelly. "Hey, kid." "Hey, Dad," Noah said, smiling. "Got a minute? For you?" "Always." Noah told him about the showcase, the instructor's offer, the pressure he felt. The idea of sharing pieces that weren't just sketches, but memories. Fragments of their story. Frank didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "If it helps someone else feel seen, it's worth it." Noah's eyes burned. "You think people will understand it?" "They don't have to," Frank replied. "They just have to feel it." Over the next 2 weeks, Noah worked harder than he ever had. The showcase would feature over 30 students. He didn't care about being the best, he cared about being honest. He titled the series Father in 4 movements. Movement I. Distance, a boy and a man, seated at opposite ends of a dinner table, a silent wall between them. Movement 2. Sacrifice, a figure leaping into oncoming headlights, pushing another into safety. Movement 3. Recovery, a hospital room, sunlight on bruised skin, 2 hands almost touching. Movement 4. Homecoming, a garage, aged tools on a bench. A son handing a framed sketch to a father with tired eyes and a hidden smile. He poured his heart into every line. Every shadow carried a memory. Every highlight shimmered with forgiveness. The night of the showcase arrived. The gallery buzzed with people, students, professors, community members. Noah stood off to the side of his display, heart thudding. One by one, people paused at his work. They didn't speak loudly. Most didn't speak at all. But they lingered. An older man wiped his eye at movement too. A young woman with a cane stared at recovery for nearly 10 minutes. A child pointed at homecoming and whispered, "That's me and Grandpa." And then, near the end of the night, a familiar voice behind him. Well, I'll be damned. Noah turned. Frank stood at the gallery entrance, dressed in his best flannel, beard trimmed, brace gone. He looked uncomfortable, but proud. "You came," Noah said, stunned. Frank walked over slowly. "Wouldn't miss it." They stood in front of homecoming together. Frank studied it carefully. "You even got the grease stains on the bench right." Noah laughed. "Of course I did." Frank looked at him, eyes soft. "You made something real, son." "I just drew what you taught me." Frank put a hand on his shoulder. And this time, there was no distance to cross. Chapter 10. The Letter He Never Sent. 2 weeks after the showcase, Noah returned home for a short fall break. The leaves in Spokane had turned brittle gold, the air crisp with the scent of chimney smoke and distant pine. The drive from Seattle had been long but quiet, the kind of silence Noah now welcomed, not feared. When he arrived, Emily greeted him with a warm hug and an overwhelming spread of home-cooked meals, insisting he looked too thin for someone who stands near a college cafeteria. Frank, ever understated, simply stood by the garage in his worn flannel and nodded. But his eyes gave him away. Pride, affection, peace. On the second day of break, a light rain fell steadily through the trees, the kind of rain that didn't demand an umbrella but crept into your bones anyway. Noah found himself back in the garage, not for any reason, just habit. The space was still the same. The wrench rack. The photo of Nathan. His own framed sketch still hung by the window. He sat down on the old stool in the corner and absent-mindedly opened a drawer on the workbench, looking for a pencil or scrap paper to doodle. But instead, what he found was an envelope. Unsealed. Worn. Tucked beneath a roll of old duct tape and a jar of screws. His name was written on the front in firm block letters. Noah. No return address. No postage. Just a letter that had never been sent. His heart stuttered. For a moment, he thought about putting it back, pretending he hadn't seen it. But something in him, something deeper than curiosity, urged him forward. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Frank's, neat, measured, as if every word had been thought over a dozen times before being committed to ink. Noah, I don't know if I'll ever give you this, but I need to write it, maybe just so I can feel like I've tried. You don't talk to me much. I know that's mostly on me. I'm not good with words, and I've never been good with kids. Not since Nathan. I want you to know something, even if it's not enough. You didn't break anything. You're not the reason I stay quiet or keep my distance. That part of me existed long before you. You just got caught in the wreckage. I watch you, though. When you draw, when you smile at your mom, when you stand in the garage pretending not to care what I'm working on. You're good. You're strong. And you're mine even if I've never said it. If I could go back, I'd tell you that sooner. But all I can do now is try to be better with whatever time we have left. I hope someday you'll call me Dad. And even if you don't, I'll love you anyway. Frank. Noah sat frozen for a long time, the words sinking into him like rain into dry soil. All those years. All that silence. And this letter, this raw, trembling confession, had been sitting in a drawer beside duct tape and nails, waiting for the courage to be handed over. A knot formed in Noah's chest. Not of sadness, but of something older, forgiveness. The kind that wasn't asked for, but offered freely. He folded the letter gently and slipped it into his back pocket. Then he walked outside, past the rust-stained garage door, across the damp grass, toward the porch where Frank sat nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. Noah didn't say anything at first, just pulled the folded letter from his pocket and handed it to him. Frank took one look and froze. His eyes widened, jaw tightening. "Where'd you find that?" he asked, almost a whisper. "In the workbench drawer." Frank didn't move, didn't speak. "I read it," Noah said softly. "I hope that's okay." Frank looked away, staring into the distance. "I was gonna give it to you once," he said. "Then I got scared it was too late." Noah sat beside him. The wood of the porch swing creaked slightly beneath their weight. "It wasn't," Noah said. Frank's voice cracked. "You shouldn't have had to dig through a drawer to hear that from me." Noah leaned back, letting the rain fall gently just beyond the edge of the roof. "It means more now," he said. "Because I know you meant it, even when you couldn't say it out loud." Frank exhaled, shaky. "You're a better man than I was at your age." "I had a good teacher," Noah replied. Frank scoffed, but the corners of his mouth tugged upward. They sat in silence for a long while, the kind that wrapped around them like a blanket. Then Frank cleared his throat. "You ever think about drawing that?" "The letter?" Noah asked. "No," Frank said, pausing. "The moment you found it. The porch. The swing. The look on your face." Noah considered it. "Yeah, I think I will." Frank looked at him. "And what would you call it?" Noah smiled, watching the raindrops slide down the porch railing. "The words you never said." Chapter 11. The Art of Letting In. Seattle was colder now. October winds blew from the sound, curling around tall buildings and rushing past bundled students like whispers of time. Noah walked through campus, sketchpad tucked under one arm, his breath forming small clouds in the air. In his pocket, the letter Frank never sent rested against his leg like a second heartbeat. He carried it with him now, not out of habit, but because it reminded him of something sacred, that even the quietest love could become the loudest part of a person's story if someone was willing to listen. His exhibit, Father, in 4 movements, had been taken down weeks ago, but the ripples hadn't stopped. A student named Ben, who rarely spoke in class, had approached him after a lecture. "My dad and I haven't talked in years," Ben had said. "But your art made me want to try again." Another girl, Maria, had emailed him. Her father was in prison. She said movement 3, the hospital drawing, made her cry because it looked like the last time he held my hand. Noah wasn't sure what to do with that kind of truth. He only knew how to respond with what he had: pencil, paper, silence, and now, presence. That Saturday, Professor Lin invited him to help at a community center downtown, where art therapy sessions were held for veterans and men in reentry programs, many struggling with isolation, PTSD, or fractured families. "It's not teaching," she told him. "It's listening." With charcoal. Noah agreed. The space was simple: high ceilings, blank walls, and long tables covered with smudged paper and blunt pencils. But the people inside filled the room with something deeper than sound, a heavy quiet, tinged with weight and memory. His first group was small. A man named Walt, maybe in his 60s, sat hunched over his sketch like it owed him something. Another, tall and silent, simply stared at a blank sheet for 20 minutes before scratching a single line and pushing it away. Noah didn't push. He just sat beside them. Drew his own images, not perfect, not profound, but honest. A pair of boots near a door. A shadow reaching across a dinner table. A father's hand over a child's scribbled drawing. Near the end of the session, Walt finally spoke. "You ever lose someone?" he asked. Noah didn't flinch. "Yeah, in a way." Walt nodded. "Me too." Then, quietly, he turned his paper toward Noah. It was crude, but powerful. A boy's bicycle, bent at the wheel, with a man standing over it, not fixing it, just watching. "I never fixed the wheel," Walt muttered. "Just stood there. Afraid he wouldn't need me after that." Noah swallowed. "Maybe he just needed to see you there." Walt looked at him, You really believe that? Noah nodded. Yeah, I do. Later that night, back in his dorm, Noah opened his laptop to find an email from the conservatory's student publication editor. Subject: Interview request. Your art and fatherhood. Hi, Noah. We're doing a special feature on student projects that sparked community dialogue. Your piece from the fall showcase, Father, in 4 movements, was mentioned multiple times by viewers and faculty. Would you be open to an interview next week? We'd love to talk about how your personal story shaped the work. Noah stared at the message for a long time. Then he hit reply. Yes, I'd be honored. 2 days later, he called Frank. Hey, kid, Frank answered. How's life with the art people? Busy, Noah said. But good. I've been helping with art therapy downtown. That's so. Yeah, some of the guys are vets. Others just trying to rebuild. Frank was quiet for a beat. They're lucky to have someone like you, he said. Noah smiled. I learned from the best. Frank snorted. Pretty sure I taught you how to change tires, not souls. Well, same wrench, different bolt. Frank laughed, not loudly, but freely. Noah leaned back in his chair. They asked me to do an interview for the school paper. Frank whistled low. You're famous now? No. Just honest. Frank hesitated. You gonna tell them the real story? Yeah, Noah said. I think I have to. Frank's voice dropped. I'm proud of you. I know, Noah replied. And I'm proud of you too, Dad. The next week, Noah's interview was published. Titled The Art of Letting In, it was part biography, part philosophy, but most of all, it was an open letter to all the sons and fathers who had sat in silence for too long, waiting for the courage to knock or the grace to open the door. The article included photos of his drawings and a quote he had asked permission from Frank to include. I thought if I stayed distant, I wouldn't mess it up. But love's not a thing you hold back. It's the only thing you're supposed to give. This story made its rounds. Students printed it. Faculty discussed it. A local news station even reached out. But for Noah, none of that mattered more than the text he got 3 days later. Frank Adler. Read it 3 times. Cried all 3. I'm framing that page for the garage. Chapter 12. A portrait of 2 hands. It was mid-November when the email arrived. Subject: Senior Showcase. Theme: Legacy. Noah reread the invitation 3 times. Though only a sophomore. Professor Lin had nominated him for early inclusion in the annual Winter Showcase, a rare honor. Legacy. The word stuck to him like paint under a fingernail. Not fame. Not inheritance. Something deeper. He knew instantly what he had to create. The studio was cold that night. Noah worked alone, surrounded by the gentle scrape of charcoal, the smell of oil pastels, and the rhythm of a soft rain against the windows. A blank canvas stood before him, larger than anything he had ever attempted. Nearly 4 feet wide. He began with a hand rough with age, calloused, traced with lines like roads on a map. Then another hand, smaller, steadier, holding the first. He didn't draw faces, just hands, one reaching, one receiving. The first draft was too stiff, too literal. So he started again. This time, he let go. Let his memories guide the shape. The weight of Frank's body as he pulled Noah from the street. The quiet touch on his shoulder after the exhibit. The hands that never built a treehouse, but rebuilt an entire relationship with nothing but silence and persistence. The background remained abstract, hints of the garage's shadows, a hospital curtain, a dinner table. All the places where love had existed quietly, uncelebrated. By morning, his fingers were smudged black with effort. The title came easily. The Hands That Raised Me. When Noah called home to tell Frank, the line went silent for a beat. You really named it that? Frank asked. I did, Noah replied. Frank cleared his throat. You're gonna make a grown man ugly cry in public, you know that? I thought you only cried once a year. Frank grunted. You're pushing my limit. They both laughed. Then Noah asked, will you come to the showcase? Yeah. Frank was quiet. You sure you want me there? Noah's voice was firm. I want you there. As my father. Frank didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, then I'll be in the front row. The gallery hall was fuller than Noah expected, students, professors, even a few local critics who circled like hawks, but stayed respectfully silent. When the hands that raised me was unveiled, the crowd hushed. Noah stood to the side, hands in his pockets, watching people move in closer. Some gasped softly. Others simply stood, studying the layered background, the etched veins in the hands, the barely visible scar on the older thumb, a detail only someone who knew Frank would notice. At the back of the room, Frank stood. Suit jacket, clean-shaven, hands folded awkwardly in front of him. Emily stood beside him, dabbing at the corner of her eyes with a tissue. Frank didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, he approached the painting. He studied it in silence, leaned in, took a deep breath. And then he reached out, not to touch, but to mirror the posture. His real hand hovering just inches from the painted one. Noah stepped beside him. Frank looked at him. You got it perfect, he whispered. Down to the scar. I remember everything, Noah said. Frank's eyes glistened. This'll outlive us both. Noah nodded. That's the point of legacy. After the showcase, as they walked out into the evening chill, Frank pulled something from his coat pocket and handed it to Noah. A folded page. Noah opened it. It was a copy of the student publication article about his story, now laminated. He smiled. You really framed it? Frank gave a crooked smile. It's hanging next to your drawing in the garage. Noah laughed. The garage is becoming a museum. Only for the important stuff. They stood together under a street lamp. Warm light casting long shadows behind them. You know, Frank said, glancing upward, I always thought I'd leave behind tools and half a pension. Never thought I'd end up in a gallery. Noah looked at him. You didn't leave behind anything, he said. You're still here. And what you gave me, built more than I ever imagined. Frank turned to him, eyes shining. I didn't always know how to love right, he said. Noah took his hand. You loved me the only way you knew how. And that was enough. That night, Noah returned to his dorm and placed a photo on his wall, one Emily had snapped after the showcase. It was of Noah and Frank standing in front of the hands that raised me. Neither of them was smiling in the photo. But the way they looked at each other, steady, sure, said everything. Beneath it, he scribbled 4 words on a post-it note. Built by quiet love. Chapter 13, Letters on the Workbench. Winter came quietly to Spokane that year. The first snowfall was modest, just enough to coat the garage roof in white and hush the world in soft stillness. Inside, the old space smelled like memory, motor oil, cedar, and the faint trace of lemon cleaner Emily had insisted on using every December since Noah was a boy. Frank sat at the workbench with a steaming mug of black coffee. The same stool, the same worn tools. But something was different. In front of him, beside the socket wrench and a pencil stub, lay a small stack of yellow notepads. He hesitated, then picked up a pen and began to write. Note number 1. Don't over-tighten the oil plug. You'll regret it. Gentle strength beats brute force, in engines and in people. He tore the page from the pad, folded it in half, and tucked it into the corner of the drawer labeled miscellaneous. He didn't expect anyone to find it. But he wrote another. Note number 2. Sometimes the things you don't say are the ones that matter most. But it's never too late to learn how to speak. That one. He folded into a small square and placed under the tape measure. Then he wrote another. And another. It became a habit. Like cleaning the bench after every repair. Like checking tire pressure every Monday. Like missing someone and never quite saying it out loud. When Noah returned home for winter break, the snow was ankle deep and the roads were slush. But the house was warm, the lights soft, and the fireplace crackled with low, familiar joy. Emily hugged him for too long, as always. Frank greeted him at the door with a quiet, "Hey, kid." But this time, he pulled Noah into a real hug. Tight, unapologetic, necessary. They had dinner, leftover roast, mashed potatoes, and a pie Emily had slightly burned but insisted was caramelized by intention. Afterward, Noah wandered into the garage like old instinct. He didn't expect to find anything new. But as he reached for a rag to wipe dust from the bench, a small folded note fell from the shelf and landed at his feet. He picked it up. Note number 6. A wrench will never ask for praise. But that doesn't mean it isn't doing the work. Some people love like that too. Noah blinked. Then he opened the drawer marked miscellaneous. More notes. Some about tools. Some about life. Some that walked the line between both. Metaphors tucked in bolts and screws. Don't throw away a rusty thing too fast. Sometimes it just needs cleaning. A garage isn't just for fixing. It's for building. Love your hands. They carry more than you realize. He smiled, then sat down on the old stool and just read. Frank didn't say anything when he entered minutes later. Just stood by the door, watching. "You found them," he said eventually. Noah looked up. "You've been writing letters in here?" Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "Not letters. Just thoughts. Lessons. Stuff I wish someone had told me when I was younger." "They're beautiful," Noah said softly. Frank looked away. "Didn't mean for them to be." Noah stood and crossed the garage, holding one of the folded pages. "I think you did," he said, "even if you didn't know it." That night, Noah gathered the notes and laid them out on the kitchen table. Emily walked in, drying her hands with a dish towel, and paused. Her eyes scanned the rows of yellow paper, her brow furrowing. "Did he finally write his autobiography?" she joked. Noah smiled. "Something better." They spent the next hour reading them out loud, laughing at the ones about broken carburetors, growing quiet at the ones about grief. You're allowed to miss someone who didn't stay. Just don't let it stop you from holding on to those who do. Not all fathers talk. Some build. Some wait. Some hand you a wrench when you need a hand. When Frank finally joined them, Emily got up and kissed his cheek. "You've been holding out on us," she whispered. Frank blushed. Noah looked up at him. "Can I take these back to school with me?" he asked. Frank raised an eyebrow. "You want garage notes at your art school?" Noah nodded. "I think other people need to read them, especially the ones who never got them from their dads." Frank didn't speak right away. Just pulled out a chair and sat down, staring at his own handwriting laid bare before him. Then he said, "They're yours now." Over the next few weeks, Noah scanned every note, compiled them into a small digital zine, and titled it, "Letters on the Workbench, Notes from a Quiet Father." He included illustrations between the pages, simple sketches of tools, hands, garages. A quiet flannel figure sitting with a coffee mug beside a shadowed boy holding a pencil. He uploaded the file to his school's intranet. He didn't expect much, but within days, emails trickled in. "This made me cry in the best way. I never had a dad like this, but now I can imagine what it would have been like. Please tell your father thank you. I wish mine had known how to say these things." Noah printed out every message and brought them home during spring break. He handed them to Frank, a bundle of digital love bound by a red ribbon. Frank read each one slowly, his thumb tracing the words like they might dissolve if he let go too fast. When he finished, he looked up. "I guess I wasn't just talking to you," he murmured. Noah placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, you were talking to all of us." Chapter 14. The Last Lesson. Spring crept gently into Spokane that year, not with sudden blooms, but with the slow exhale of warmth returning to the earth. The snow had melted. The garage door stayed open longer. And Frank Adler, now past 50, but standing stronger than ever, had taken to leaving a folding chair just outside the threshold to enjoy the afternoon sun. Noah had returned again, this time just for a weekend visit between classes. But he noticed it immediately. The smell of metal was still there, but there was something new too, something lighter. Voices. One voice in particular, high, eager, youthful. From the sidewalk, Noah caught sight of a boy, no older than 12, standing beside Frank's workbench, eyes wide as Frank demonstrated how to loosen a bolt without stripping the threads. Noah approached slowly. Frank looked up and grinned. Look who finally made time for the garage again. The boy turned around and blinked at Noah shyly. This is Jesse, Frank said. Lives 2 houses down. Found him poking around my toolshed last week. Figured it was either let him help me change spark plugs or keep replacing missing screwdrivers. Jesse gave a sheepish smile. Noah laughed. Stepping into the garage. First thing I ever stole from here was a measuring tape. Frank pointed at Jesse. See? It's a rite of passage. They worked for a while, Noah on a small stool sketching a new idea, Jesse and Frank cleaning up a rusted tool set. The rhythm felt familiar, full of shared silences and soft instruction. At one point, Jesse held up a wrench. What's this one called again? Frank didn't look. That's a 5/8, open-ended. Works best on older American engines. Not universal, kinda like some people. Noah raised an eyebrow. You quoting your notes now? Frank shrugged. Old habits. Jesse was too young to know the deeper meanings tucked into those metaphors. But Noah saw it, the way Frank had softened. Not in strength, but in approach. He had become a teacher, a mentor, a father figure to more than just one kid. That evening, after Jesse had gone home with a borrowed socket set and a proud grin, Noah and Frank sat on the porch sipping ginger ale. You're good with him, Noah said. Frank shrugged. He reminds me of you. Quiet. Curious. Too smart to be ignored. He told me you gave him one of your notes. Frank smiled into his cup. The one about how a stripped bolt still deserves a second chance. Noah nodded. You're building something again, aren't you? Frank looked out at the darkening sky. I thought I'd stopped a long time ago. But maybe building people is what lasts longer than cars. There was a long pause between them. Then Noah said, I've been thinking about what happens next. Frank raised an eyebrow. You dropping out? Noah smirked. No. But after graduation, I want to open a small gallery. Not just for fine art, I want it to be part community studio, part workshop. A space where kids like Jesse can come and draw, paint, fix things. Maybe hang their work next to someone else's story. Frank was quiet, thoughtful. That sounds like a hell of a place, he said. I want to call it the workbench, Noah added. Because everything I became, it started there. Frank's hands trembled just slightly as he set down his cup. You think people will show up? Noah turned to him. They already have. They just don't have anywhere to go yet. The next morning, as Noah packed up to leave, Frank handed him a small envelope. No name on the front. Noah opened it carefully. Inside was a final note, written in the same square, steady handwriting as all the others. Note number 31, the last lesson. Tools break. People do too. What matters is how you fix them and who you become after. If you build something with your hands, leave room in it for someone else to grow. Love isn't loud, but if you do it right, it echoes long after you're gone. Noah folded the note slowly, his throat tightening. He looked up at Frank, whose face was unreadable as always, but whose eyes had never been clearer. You're not going anywhere, Noah said quietly. Frank smiled. Maybe not. But if I did, you'd have everything you need to keep going. Noah stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. Not like the first one. Not awkward. Not cautious. But full. Complete. Frank's arms wrapped around him like they'd been waiting his whole life to do it right. Noah whispered. You were never just a mechanic. You were my foundation. Frank's voice cracked. And you were the reason I kept fixing myself. That afternoon, Noah left Spokane with a toolbox in the trunk and a dream taking shape in his mind. A gallery. A garage. A space full of color, sound, wood shavings, paint, silence, and legacy. He called it the workbench. And above its door hung a brass plate that read, "Built by quiet hands. For loud hearts." Chapter 15. The grand opening. The sign above the glass door gleamed in the late spring sun. The workbench. Built by quiet hands. For loud hearts. Noah stood across the street, keys jangling in his pocket, staring at the building he had spent months preparing, a former mechanic's shop, renovated with warm pine floors, high beams, and soft natural light. The right wall was lined with easels and paint stations. The left wall? Tool racks and salvaged workbenches, lovingly restored. Art and mechanics. Grit and imagination. Side by side. Just like it had been in the garage back home. The space smelled faintly of sawdust and turpentine. Of beginnings. By noon, the place buzzed with life. Local families wandered in, eyes wide with wonder. Children clutched colored pencils. Teens hovered near the gallery wall, whispering about the sketches pinned there, some Noah's, some Jesse's. Others from kids who had never seen their names next to a frame before. Noah stood near the entrance, greeting each guest with a quiet, grateful smile. And then he saw them. Emily, in a floral scarf and proud tears, and Frank, walking slower now, a cane in one hand, Jesse's small fingers in the other. Noah's heart caught. Frank stopped just inside the doorway. His eyes scanned the space, the exposed brick, the paint-splattered aprons, the sound of jazz playing softly from a corner speaker. Then he saw it, framed on the center wall above everything else. The hands that raised me. Frank stared at the piece for a long time. Noah walked over. "Still fits?" he asked. Frank smirked. "That hand's a little more wrinkled now. It's earned everyone." Frank looked around the room. "You really did it." Noah nodded. "We did it." The ribbon cutting happened at 2 p.m. sharp. Noah stood at the center of a small crowd, kids, neighbors, former professors, even Professor Lynn herself, and cleared his throat. "I didn't build this place because I love art," he said, voice steady through the microphone. "Or because I love tools. I built this because someone once gave me a space to grow quietly, patiently, without asking me to become anything more than myself." He glanced at Frank. "My dad didn't say a lot, but everything I am is because of what he did." Frank's eyes shimmered, but he didn't look away. "So this place, the workbench, isn't just for artists. It's for anyone who ever wanted to create something, fix something, or say something when they didn't have the words. This is for the kids, the fathers, the people in between." He picked up the scissors. "Let's build something beautiful." The crowd applauded. The ribbon fell, and the workbench officially opened its doors. Hours passed in a warm blur. Frank sat in the back corner, holding court with a few kids while helping one carefully sand down the edge of a crooked picture frame. Emily brought coffee. Noah moved from person to person, answering questions, laughing, taking it all in. Then, as the sun began to dip, Jesse ran over to Noah. "Mr. Whitman, can I show you something?" Noah smiled. "Of course." Jesse tugged him toward the back wall, to a small framed sketch hung beside the tools. It was a drawing, rough, clumsy in parts, but unmistakably sincere. A young boy sitting at a workbench. Across from him, an older man in a flannel shirt and glasses, holding a wrench in one hand and a pencil in the other. They were smiling. Below it, written in crooked lettering, "Mr. Frank showed me how to fix things. I think I want to be like him." Noah blinked hard, then turned to Jesse and knelt down. "You already are." That night, long after the crowd had gone and the lights had dimmed, Noah locked the front door, turned off the sign, and sat alone in the space. He could still hear the laughter echoing. Still feel Frank's hand on his shoulder after the last guest left. "You made something real," Frank had said. and Noah believed him. He walked to the workbench by the gallery wall, pulled open a drawer, and took out one of Frank's yellow notepads, a clean page. He picked up a pen and began to write. Note number 1. From the sun. You don't have to speak loudly to leave something behind. You just have to show up, stay present, and pass down your tools even if all you have are your hands. Some of us were raised in silence. But if you listen closely, that silence hums with love. He folded the note and placed it in the drawer the same way Frank used to. A full circle. Quiet and complete. Years later, people would visit the workbench and find notes hidden in drawers, slipped between sketchbooks, pinned behind tool cabinets. Some written by Noah, others by students. One even signed simply, F.A. They became a tradition. The words passed down like heirlooms, quiet, honest, and lasting. And every time someone found one, they'd hold it gently, like a wrench that fit perfectly in their hand. Chapter 16. Echoes in the Quiet. Seattle felt different this time. It wasn't the weather, though the sky was its usual overcast canvas, nor the campus, which buzzed with familiar footsteps and wind-fluttered flyers taped to lampposts. Noah walked down the brick path toward the community studio he now managed part-time, a small building tucked between a campus bookstore and a half-forgotten bike rack. He had been given full creative freedom to curate the spring exhibit, a student-led program focused on the intersection of family, silence, and identity. He called the theme, Words Between Us. Not unspoken, but between the fragile, invisible language passed through glances, half gestures, even stubborn silence. He knew that language intimately. And he knew others did too. Inside the studio, Noah watched as his small team prepared the space. On one wall, photography from children of immigrants, capturing parents who never said, I love you, but worked 3 jobs. On another, a sound installation, low static interrupted by whispery voice notes, many of them anonymous. And in the center, a table with a single item on it. A wooden box. A sign read, Leave a letter you never sent. Noah had built the box himself, using leftover pine from the shelves at the workbench. It was smooth, sturdy, a place that invited truth. And slowly, it began to fill. That weekend, Noah stayed late, sorting through the submitted letters with permission. Dad, you never told me you were proud. But I saw it in your hands. To my stepmother, I hated you until the day you sat by me in the hospital. You didn't have to, but you did. Grandpa, I never knew your voice, but your toolbox taught me how to build. Noah read each one like a prayer. Then, without thinking, he added one of his own. He didn't sign it, but he knew what it said. You never wanted applause. But every time I'm brave enough to show up, it's because I learned from you. The following Monday, Professor Lin dropped by with 2 visitors, board members from a local arts foundation. They were impressed with the exhibit. Moved even. But what they noticed most wasn't the art. It was the people. Students who lingered. Adults who cried quietly in corners. Children who traced sketches with small fingers and whispered, This looks like my dad. After the tour, one of the board members pulled Noah aside. We've been looking to sponsor a long-term community gallery. Something real. Something that leaves a mark. Noah's eyes widened. You think this could be that? The man nodded. It already is. That evening, back in his dorm, Noah opened a message from Jesse. A scanned image. A drawing, this time done with more confidence, more shading, more life. It showed a new scene. Jesse holding open a door while another kid peeked into Frank's garage. A small sign above the door said simply, Everyone starts somewhere. Beneath it, Jesse had written, I helped someone today. Like Mr. Frank helped me. Is that what legacy means? Noah didn't reply immediately. Instead, he stared at the image until his chest ached with joy. Then he texted back. Exactly. Before going to sleep that night, Noah added one last letter to the wooden box. This time, he signed it. To the next one who reads this. If you're holding this letter, maybe you've been quiet for too long. Maybe someone never told you they loved you the way you needed. Maybe you're waiting for a word, a hug, a moment that hasn't come yet. But maybe, just maybe, love was already there. In how they fixed your bike. In how they left the porch light on. In how they stayed. And maybe now, it's your turn to let someone else in. Don't wait for perfect words. Just show up. Noah. Chapter 16. Echoes in the Quiet. Seattle was wrapped in a familiar gray mist as Noah made his way through campus. The brisk autumn air filled his lungs, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee from nearby cafes. He carried his sketchpad under one arm, the other tucked in his jacket pocket where the letter from Frank, the one never sent, rested like a small heartbeat. The community art studio felt like a second home now. Its aged brick walls and tall windows let in the soft light of a cloudy day, perfect for creating and reflecting. Noah had been entrusted with curating the upcoming spring exhibition. And the theme he chose was personal, words between us. It wasn't about silence, it was about the language spoken in moments unspoken. The tender spaces where emotions lingered between people who struggled to say what they felt. Noah understood that language better than anyone. Inside, a team was setting up the exhibit. Photographs captured quiet glances between parents and children. Sound installations played faint whispers of long-held secrets. In the center of the room sat a handcrafted wooden box with a simple invitation, "Leave a letter you never sent." Letters began to fill the box, heartfelt notes to fathers, to lost siblings, to mothers who couldn't find the words. Noah read each one with reverence. One read, "Dad, you never said you were proud, but I saw it in your hands." Another, "To my stepmother. I hated you until the day you held my hand in the hospital." There was even one from a granddaughter to a grandfather she never met, thanking him through the language of tools and legacy. Moved. Noah quietly slipped a letter of his own into the box. "You never sought applause. But every time I'm brave enough to show up, it's because I learned from you." Later, Professor Lin arrived with visitors from a local arts foundation. They marveled not just at the art, but at the stories and connections the exhibit fostered. "We're looking for a community gallery that leaves a lasting impact," one said. "This is already that place." That night, Noah received a message from Jesse. A scanned drawing of a doorway, a new generation opening the space Frank and Noah had built, with the words, "Everyone starts somewhere." Noah replied simply, "Exactly. Before sleep." He penned one final letter for the wooden box. "To the next one who reads this. If you're holding this, maybe you've been silent too long. Maybe love was always there in the light left on. The steady hands, the quiet presence. It's your turn now. Show up." Noah. Chapter 17. When a father visits the studio. The community studio was humming softly with the quiet buzz of a weekday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the beams. Noah was arranging some of the letters collected in the Words Between Us exhibit, sorting through heartfelt notes from people who had dared to share what they'd never said aloud. He heard the bell above the door jingle and looked up. Standing hesitantly in the doorway was Frank. For a moment, Noah was speechless. His father, the man who had shaped so much of his story through silent love, stood there, looking slightly unsure but undeniably present. Frank stepped in slowly, removing his coat. His eyes scanning the room filled with paintings, photographs, and letters. He approached Noah and gave a small nod. "I came to see where you've been building," Frank said quietly. Noah smiled, warmth spreading through him. "I'm glad you came." They walked together through the gallery, Frank pausing to read notes, study photographs, and absorb the stories woven into the space. When they reached Noah's own drawings, the ones that had started it all, Frank's gaze lingered longest on the piece titled, "The Hands That Raised Me." "I never thought I'd be in a gallery," Frank said, his voice soft. "No one did," Noah replied. "But you're more present here than you ever were at the dinner table." Frank chuckled, then grew serious. "I wanted to say something today. in front of everyone. Noah's eyes widened. You want to speak? Frank nodded slowly. Not just about us, about every man who struggles to find words for love. When the time came, Frank stood in front of a modest crowd gathered for a community event. His voice was steady, tinged with the humility of a man unaccustomed to the spotlight. I wasn't good at talking, he began, but I always loved, maybe in ways I couldn't say, but I hope I showed it. He looked toward Noah. To my son, thank you for teaching me how to be better. For showing me that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. The room filled with quiet applause, some faces glistening with tears. Noah stood beside him, heart full. Together, they had bridged the silence. Together, they had built a legacy. Chapter 18, Full Circle. Months passed like gentle waves washing over the shores of Noah's life. The gallery flourished. A sanctuary where stories whispered between brushstrokes and shared silences. Frank's presence at the studio became a steady heartbeat, no longer hesitant, but warmly embraced by the community. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped behind the Seattle skyline, Noah found himself standing in the middle of the studio, gazing at a new installation. It was a series of hands painted, sketched, and sculpted, each telling a story of love spoken without words. Frank approached quietly from behind. These, Noah said softly, are all the hands that taught me how to love. Frank nodded, eyes misty. And the ones you taught, too. They stood in companionable silence until the first guests arrived for a special event, the gallery's anniversary. Among them was Jesse, now taller, his eyes bright with promise, carrying a small sketchbook filled with fresh drawings. Noah watched as Jesse greeted Frank with a firm handshake and a boyish grin. The torch had passed, not with loud proclamations, but with the quiet strength of shared legacy. Later that night, Noah stepped outside and looked up at the stars, each one a silent witness to the journey they'd taken. He smiled, whispering into the night air, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." And in that moment, the silence between them was full of love, complete and unspoken, echoing into forever.